Hello there, welcome back to this third video in a series of videos looking at my Eurorack modular system and how I use it in live performance. In the last video saw how we could actually control the oscillator from a sequencer to produce different notes and feed that into the mixer. So just remind you of the patch, we've got a sawtooth wave coming out of the oscillator into the mixer, and from this row of control voltages on this 8-step analog sequencer coming out of here and going into the control voltage input, which controls the pitch, and the clock output is going into the clock. The clock output from this module here, which is like the master clock, is going into the clock input on the sequencer, and you can see that the steps are moving along the top here. And if we turn it up, we can hear what we can't hear for some reason. It's switched on. And if I turn these knobs, the notes change. Okay. So that's all well and good. Still not really very usable in a live performance setting because the notes are a bit all over the place at the moment, and although the notes are changing, the oscillator is constantly oscillating and going into the input, so when I switch it on, it's on all the time. Okay, it'd be nice to be able to select, perhaps only play certain notes of the sequence. So we're going to look at how we do that. So basically, how can I switch the oscillator on and off to whether it makes a noise or not. In fact, we don't actually switch the oscillator on and off, the oscillator just stays on. But what we do is, rather than feeding the output of the oscillator straight into the mixer, we go unplug that. So the output of the oscillator now we're going to feed into the input of this module here, which is a dual VCA, which stands for voltage controlled amplifier. And VCA is a very you'll find VCAs on all modular synthesizers, because whereas an oscillator produces a waveform and therefore you can control the pitch with the voltage, the amplifier controls the volume of the sound. So basically we have an input and an output. So I'm going to feed the output of the oscillator into the input of the amplifier, and then we're going to take the output of the amplifier and feed that into our mixer. Switch it on, can't hear anything, and that's because the volume on the amplifier is turned right down. If I turn that up, we're back to where we were. Okay. What would be nice now though is, because this is a voltage controlled amplifier, we can use a voltage to control how loud the sound is. So if we feed a voltage in, so if there's a high voltage going into this last input here called the CV in, control voltage input, if we feed a voltage into there, the volume of the amplifier, the volume of the amplifier will be dependent on the voltage going in there. So if I feed a high voltage in there, the sound will go through. If there's no voltage in there, which there isn't at the moment, nothing's coming out. So that's why we can't hear it. So what voltage do we put in there? Well, again, we can use whatever we want. For example, if like in the last video, if I use my low frequency oscillator, let's use a triangle wave output from there. So this is a triangle wave going up and down very slowly. If I feed that into the control voltage input of the amplifier, or VCA, the volume should go up and down slowly. In fact, what we'll do is we'll just stop the sequencer, so we've got a constant. Let's listen to it together. I'll just stop the sequencer there, so we've just got a constant tone at the moment. turn it down. Now I'll feed the control voltage from the low frequency oscillator into the CVN. Turn it up. So there you can hear the actual, as this triangle wave goes up and down, the sound gets louder and softer. Let's put it into a, that's a sine wave, a bit smoother. If I turn up the speed of the low frequency oscillator, volume goes up and down accordingly with the speed. You could use a sawtooth wave. Or a reverse sawtooth wave. Square wave. So the voltage that's going in there is controlling the volume of the sound that's going in this case from this oscillator here. That's okay, that's good. We can it gives you a sort of tremolo effect, but it's still going to be on all the time. If I want to actually select different notes that are going to play or not play from my sequencer here, I'm going to do something a little bit different. So rather than using an LFO, I'm going to use this envelope generator here. Now what this does, it's in a way it's similar to a low frequency oscillator, but it doesn't keep oscillating up and down. It will just go basically oscillate once when it gets a trigger, and I can shape that the shape of the way the voltage goes up and down using these controls here, ADSR, attack, decay, sustain, release. I'm not going to go into envelopes, they're a little bit confusing. You can look them up on the on Google, or you can Google envelope generators and go into them in a lot of depth if you want to. But you'll hear what it does when I plug it in. Now what the envelope generator needs is, the first thing it needs is a gate input or a trigger input. Gates and triggers are different, but for this video we can sort of treat them as the same thing really. So this needs a gate input, and when it gets a gate input it'll go through its cycle and then stop until it gets another gate input, and then it'll go again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the output of the envelope generator first of all. That's nice and easy, and feed that into the control voltage input of our amplifier. So when that gets a trigger, the amplifier will come on and then go off again. Okay, in whatever. However, I've set these controls will change how it goes on and off, but it'll basically go on and off. Now, where's it going to get the gate input from? Well, I want it to come from these steps here, and this sequencer, as well as having two different rows of control voltages, has actually four different, although there's only two rows of switches, but these switches can go into top position, middle is off, bottom position. We've got trigger 1 off, trigger 2, trigger 3 in the up position on the second row, off, and then that's a gate. And those outputs appear here on these four jack sockets here. So if I, at the moment, let's switch everything to off for now. There we go, everything's on off. So if I move one of these switches to up, that's on step 5, every time the sequencer gets to step 5, a trigger output will appear there. Okay, so I'm going to feed the output of trigger 1 into my gate input envelope. So now, if we start the sequence, every time it gets to, we shouldn't hear any of the other steps except when we get to step 5, because that's switched on. Nothing. I've switched it on here. And I've got 7 switched on as well. So you can see, loud. When it gets to step 5, that triggers the envelope, and that then lets the sound through the amplifier into my mixer. If I turn the attack up, you can hear that the volume's ramping up before it dies away. When it dies away, as it dies away, you are actually, even though it's not triggering, you can still hear the other notes of the sequence, which is a bit fiddly. So you have to be very careful with that. So I can change the note of it. So if I let's switch 2 and 3 on as well. Okay, so using the trigger output there, I can actually create interesting rhythms. There we go. So that's getting near what I use for my bass note patch. Okay, trigger output into the envelope output into the control voltage of the amplifier. The output of the oscillator goes into the audio input, the amplifier output into my mixer. And again, the clock controlling the speed of the sequencer. The only thing we have, the only other 2 elements now to get a proper bass line patch is be able to control the tone of the sound a bit, because I can't really change the way the sound is, the tone of the sound at the moment. It's just either whichever waveform I use. So to do that, we're going to use a filter, and at the moment the notes are totally variable at the moment. So if I just switch my piano on, let's try and find out what note that is. So that note. Nearest down. So at the moment, I've tuned using the tune knob. I've tuned the oscillator. Probably easier on a sawtooth wave, if you can hear it. So that's roughly a C. If we listen to these other notes, it's all out of tune, and that's because these notes aren't fitting into any sort of scale. They could be any note at all. For example, so if I stop this sequence, Because I'll change so the note is totally variable. It's not fitting into any sort of scale at all. So but if I'm altering these, I could be hitting any note, so it's just going to be totally out of tune. So I need to be able to get these notes in tune, and I need to be able to alter the tone of the notes as well. And then I've got a really good sequenced bass patch there, which is actually what I use for live. So in the next video we're going to look at how I use the filter to control the tone, and how I use the quantizer to actually fix the notes on a certain scale. See you next time.